Hi, I'm Widow Centauri. I'm here today to talk to you about gender-neutral language. The reason I'm actually recording this was I was scheduled to be at the Desiree Alliance conference. It's happening in Las Vegas right now, and their theme is the audacity of health. And the reason I can't be at the Desiree Alliance conference is because my health is really unstable. And so I decided I would just turn on a video camera and talk to you about what I was going to talk at the conference about, and maybe you'll like it, maybe you won't, but either way you won't be able to throw things at me, so yay. Luckily for you, I'm not going to talk about this all by myself, because otherwise it would just be me prattling on and on and on about things that will start to sound like neologisms, and your eyes will glass over, and you'll start looking at the books behind me, wondering if I have anything good to read, or wondering if that one thing that you happen to spot is actually on my shelf. Like, is that a joke, or did she really read that? So, we've got a guest. She is a columnist for the Rainbow Times, a transgender activist, and Miss Trans New England 2009. Oh, and also my best friend. Here she comes. She's Lorelei Erisis. Yay!
Yay! Hello.
Welcome to the show, Lorelei.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Widow.
So, what pronouns do you like to have used in reference to you?
I prefer female and or fabulous pronouns. I go by she, her, oh my god, it's Lorelei. Anything like that works.
Very nice then.
Yeah.
When I refer to you, I'll do my best to
Like,
call you, oh my god, it's Lorelei.
I know. You know, I always feel really boring about my pronouns.
Really?
Just because I personally identify as kind of as binarily female, but find that really dull. So,
Don't.
yeah.
Find that dull.
Thank
Just
you.
be that. If that's how you feel, that's how you feel. It's not a competition. You don't have to go out and pick interesting pronouns just for the sake of it. You know,
Right.
It's not. I mean, there's something to be said about enjoying pronouns that people already know how to spell, pronounce, and utilize. You don't have to get into that sort of argument with anyone who might already have enough questions about sex and gender presentation that they might not want to be confronted with yet one more thing. So,
Sure.
if you identify with binary pronouns, hooray for you. You
Yeah.
know, if you don't, well, then just take a stand and tell people. Personally, I like to go by squee. Squee is my preferred pronoun.
Squee is exciting. I like squee.
Thank you. SQUEA. Not squee that people use on the internet to mean, like, yay, hooray,
Woo!
That's so cheerful.
Yeah.
I'm not that cheerful.
No, that's not you.
No, squee.
It's really.
Squee
Squee isn't this person here, not
Yes.
yay!
Use it like he or she, squee.
Mm-hmm.
I also enjoy singular they quite a bit. Singular they is a very fine pronoun. In fact, I think everyone should use singular they. Yes, and singular them. Yeah. But you can just, use all kinds of words for pronouns. I mean, historically there have been so many pronouns. I don't think that a lot of people realize that gender-neutral pronouns have been in circulation since the 1800s, and there's so many gender-neutral pronouns that if you don't feel like you identify with traditional binary pronouns and you aren't particularly excited about singular they, even though it's easy to use, and I honestly think that if you're looking for a new one, it's a good pick.
I had a real resistance to they them when you really first introduced me to it, because I'd been trained for so long in my writing and my speaking not to use that as a singular pronoun. But I have found that it's become easier to use as I've been using it.
Well, listen. The language authorities would like you to never use they and them in a singular context. There's some uptight English teacher somewhere yelling at some young person right now, telling them that it's wrong and it's bad. Except what they're not telling that young person is that they was the gender-neutral pronoun of choice, singular they, until 1850, when an English Act of Parliament ordered he become the generic singular pronoun. No one really thought that was a very good idea, but you know the English, they came along and killed people for it.
So it's all the English fault.
The English can be blamed for pretty much everything. Pretty much everything. Yes. And for the removal of singular they as a standard third person pronoun, absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, there's a paper trail. So
is that where she came from?
She was a little bit different. She was actually introduced before he became the standard gender neutral pronoun. It was introduced, the year is escaping me, I wish I had all my notes, as a way to make the pronoun system more specific. Because, right now there's this big movement to make gender neutral, but once upon a time, people thought that language,
I love a bedtime story,
was designed to be specific so that you wouldn't be confused. And she was actually crafted. She is not, people say, these invented pronouns. She was invented as a way to be more specific about the gender of the person you were referring to. And so, though there have been many, many pronouns and many you can choose from, you is always a fine pronoun. One, people don't really like one. One never caught on.
It feels so legalistic.
Yes.
Or royal, actually. One prefers.
One does prefer. One prefers their pronoun of choice.
One prefers my pronouns.
Some of the other pronouns that have had, brief moments in history include thon. Thon was popular for a number of years. It made it into 2 different dictionaries, but somehow it faded out of popularity. Recently, school children in Baltimore have been utilizing the pronoun yo as a singular third-person pronoun. Teachers noticed, they said, I think the students are referring to each other as yo. So they did a survey of, I think it was about 200 students through the Baltimore public school system, and indeed they found out that yo is being used as pronoun, and then they compared it to rap lyrics and lyrics of hip hop and things that the students had possibly been exposed to, just to find any reference as yo as a pronoun, and they couldn't. So what has been determined is that the Baltimore public school children have invented their own gender-neutral pronoun.
I think that's awesome.
Don't you though? Don't you though?
Yo went out with Jimmy to the malt shop. Was probably spoken by no one ever.
You just said it.
No, I did.
Actually, my pronoun squee is actually invented as well.
Yeah.
It was invented at San Diego State. There were a group of us graduate students who were sitting around talking about my thesis topic, which is gender-neutral language. And someone said, so you can just make these words up? And I said, well, yeah, all these words, people just make them up all the time. Squee was born.
Yay!
Yay! And I think it's a great pronoun.
Yeah, I think it's fun.
So now that I'm actually done, I finished doing the research I was working on with gender neutral language. It actually didn't stop when I came to an end with my thesis. I keep unpacking it. But my research actually, I did 20 interviews of college-age students about gender-neutral language. What I found out is a lot of this language is morphing and changing all the time, that people are using it and finding it to be very playful, and that it doesn't actually have one solid definition all the time. Some words are really amazingly appropriate, and other words are not. Some words come and go, they come in and out of vogue. Depending on the minority group, the words that become acceptable to use in mainstream lexicon are largely based on what that minority group decides to allow. So, I was just reading something, and it just, every time I see it, it's like nails on a chalkboard. It's the word transgenders.
I really hate that. really hate it.
What would you rather see people use?
Well, the appropriate usage would be transgender people. Because it's not, we're not. I usually think of transgender as being an experiential thing. It's a descriptive term. As in, so I'm from Cape. I was born and raised on Cape Cod. Therefore, I am a Cape Codder. I'm a woman from Cape Cod. I'm also a transgender woman. I'm a Yankee woman. I'm an Irish woman. So it's like that. So, it's not like transgenders makes us sound like some bizarre, exotic creature that, while some of us may be, it's not a way to describe a person.
So it's very dehumanizing.
It's really dehumanizing, yeah. It reduces us to that one thing about us. It reduces us to an experience rather than being fully fleshed. And it's problematic too, because there's so much infighting about any of these terms that it can be hard for an outsider to pick up what's right to use. So for instance, like I recently almost gave up on, I will correct people everywhere I see them making the mistake of using transgenders. But I recently got to a point where I almost gave up because I was seeing usage of that word coming from so many different, fairly legitimate places, coming from legitimate news sources. And coming from respectable people in the community who really kind of ought to know better, but who are still using the word, coming from a lot of allies to the transgender community, simply because they don't know. They haven't been corrected, they haven't been set straight.
Maybe they got the memo that singular they was an acceptable word choice, and they just went hog wild and decided to mix and match.
Sure. Language is their bitch.
Yes, it is, and it's yours as well.
Yeah.
Another word that when I see I don't cringe. Actually, a word I really embrace is the word cisgender.
Mm-hmm. I love that word.
I'm so fond of this word. I mean, do you remember before people used the word cisgender, the sorts of twisted amalgamations of language people would sputter out in order to try and convey that little bit of information?
It was awful. You had to completely negate your experience to describe who you are as a transgender person. Not genetic, all the other terms like genetic girl, and bio girl, and
non-transgender,
yep.
And of course least favorite of mine, normal.
Yeah.
Wow, as though other human beings don't have any validity or normalcy to their being. It's like you're not an authentic person because what? Why? And
it's so tricky and subversive too, that before the word cisgender, it forced us to use that sort of language, not like a normal woman, but like a transgender woman, which is awful.
It is awful. It really and truly is awful. It also perpetuates a lot of privilege and a lot of discrimination. I see that when people can separate themselves and consider themselves to be normal, and all those other people out there, they're not normal. That gives them some special sort of privilege to act and be and treat others differently. And I mean, that's the crux of all discriminatory practice. How in the hell did we get through that conversation where someone said, oh, genetic person, or a non-transgender person, and it's like, how long did it take us to find the word cisgender? And then how many people are still up in arms about it, saying that's not what I am, I'm normal. And it's like, it's so hard to teach people new words when they just want to believe so badly that apparently there's some, like, I hear this argument all the time, like, that word mutilates the English language. It's like, well, the English language is growing exponentially all the time.
Language is a living thing.
It is. Any language that doesn't have constant growth is a dying language. So there's this, you touched on it, there's this side effect of the word cisgender that is really kind of beautiful, to me at least. I have known a number of cisgender people who get really angry about me using that word for I'll let the truck go by. My library is on a busy street.
Oh, yes it is.
Big truck time.
So it's really going into big truck time right now.
Yeah,
they get really angry, and it's this great example because the reason they get angry is they really dislike being labeled.
Yes.
By someone else.
But it's fine for them to do just that.
Absolutely.
It's fine for them to dehumanize someone, to label them, and to say, to stand there on their soapbox as though they are somehow more legitimately human than everyone else. And I think that eliminating all of those archaic terms and simply sticking with cisgender as someone who identifies as the sex and gender categorization they were given at birth, that seems perfectly reasonable. That's a reasonable way to convey that information without dehumanizing any other humans.
Absolutely.
And a lot of this language, it's being modified, it's being changed. We were saying that language has to grow, and one of the things that I see happening in society right now is that language is being modified at a state government and a university level. The bureaucrats are changing the language to make it more gender neutral, to make it more inclusive, to make it seem less sexist.
Oh, yes, language, bureaucrats. Got it. This is where I come in. Language and bureaucrats. Yeah, so it's interesting how much of legislation is around simply inserting words into laws. In Massachusetts, we just recently passed this transgender civil rights law. I hope I'm not jumping ahead of you here.
You are, but that's okay.
Okay.
We'll keep going right with it.
All right.
So you passed this
So we just
law.
introduced this transgender civil rights law, which is which covered areas of employment, discrimination in areas of employment, housing, healthcare. It had hate crime protections, a whole slew of things, minus public accommodations. And people seem to have this idea that what we're doing when we're passing laws is creating this whole shiny new law, when in fact the whole crux of that law was 7 years of hard work by hundreds of people to insert 2 words into an already existing set of laws.
So it took 7 years to get 2 words put in to an existing set of laws.
Yeah.
You weren't making up new laws.
No.
You weren't asking for anything that didn't exist already. 2 words. What were those 2 words?
Just adding the words gender identity into already existing anti-discrimination laws.
Gender identity.
Yes.
And how does that translate to someone? I mean, like, let's say someone was about to be discriminated against, and yet after all this work you have these 2 words that have managed to manifest themselves in the anti-discrimination laws, and so now said bigot can't discriminate against someone based on gender identity.
Sure.
What does that mean?
Well, the way it's defined in the law itself is gender identity shall mean a person's gender-related identity, appearance, or behavior, whether or not that gender-related identity, appearance, or behavior is different from that traditionally associated with the person's physiology or assigned sex at birth. So, essentially, how you present, like who you are, what I am a woman, I live my life as a woman, that's my gender identity.
And so now that this law has been modified
Yeah.
to include these 2 words, now the state is no longer allowed to discriminate against you. Private practices.
Right.
You said at some
Right.
point, you said healthcare?
Healthcare?
How does that work?
Well, it used to be that you could be, in Massachusetts, mind you, which is my area of focus, which is generally considered to be a fairly liberal place. Until last year, I could be fired from my job, I could be not hired, I could be refused a house, or I could be turned away at the hospital. A doctor could refuse to treat me.
Because of your gender
Because
identity.
of my gender identity.
That's horrible.
And even more so, they're not required to have any familiarity with trans-related health. So they can turn me away and they don't really have to know anything about the specifics of our health care.
Wow. Now, you're actively seeking a bill to add public accommodations to this.
Yeah.
And so from what I understand, public accommodations are any place the public goes. Restaurants, buses, city parks, sidewalk, library. And that includes hospitals.
Yes.
So if you were to go into a hospital before the gender identity was actually added to the anti-discrimination law, they could have sent you away.
Yes.
But now they can simply refuse to let you enter?
Yeah.
How does this work?
It's pretty messed up is how it works. And it's like that in a number of different fields. So I could go to the hospital and they could, because it's a public place, turn me away. It's tricky because they can't refuse me care, but they can refuse me entry.
And what about young trans people in, like, say, public schools? Can they refuse to let young people attend public schools?
There have been some, yes. Not specifically here in Massachusetts, because one of the side effects of the last law we passed were a set of guidelines that were created to protect gender identity in schools, which has been a really positive step. But really, all over the country still, most of the country still has no protection for transgender people. So, trans kids routinely are not allowed to come to school, turned away, told that their gender identity will not do, is disruptive, inappropriate.
Inappropriate.
Yeah.
I was inappropriate. As a child, I was a very inappropriate child. I can't imagine how horrible it would have been to have been turned away because of who I was.
Yeah.
When they threw me out of school, it was because of how I acted. It was a direct consequence of my actions. How horrible. How horrible. It's simply a tragedy. I mean, we live in this land where people roam around speaking of freedom. They think they're free. They think they're allowed to have rights and things, But then trans youth can't attend school. You could be denied entrance to a hospital. I mean, and what of all the trans people? I mean, there's a horrible, brutal history of trans sex workers being, not just trans sex workers, but trans people in general, and sex workers in general, not necessarily, just trans people who are sex workers, but both of those groups have a history of, a much higher rate of violence.
Absolutely, yeah.
Towards them.
I mean, it's okay. So, for trans people generally, sex is dangerous. So, just speaking as a civilian, speaking as a non-sex worker, just a trans woman trying to date, it's dangerous. I'm afraid to go home with men, or mainly men, because I have no idea when they're gonna commit a hate crime. When if I'm going to get beaten because of who I am, and to take those fears and just amplify them to somebody a trans person who's relying on sex work, who's taking those chances much more frequently. Like, I never date because I'm afraid to.
Well, you have to ask yourself how much that has to do with being trans and how much that has to do with being a woman in this culture. Women in this culture...
I think a lot of it, both.
There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear-mongering. There's a lot of violence. There is. And, there's always some story in the news. The more well-connected we are, the more we see. We see all this violence and all this trauma, and, this woman was beaten and that person was raped, and oh my God, the world is a big, scary place. And it's dangerous to be a woman in this culture. And it's dangerous to be a sex worker, and it's dangerous to cross the street and ride the bus. But sometimes we do those things.
Absolutely.
And sometimes you get there just fine. And it's like, it would be nice if there were laws to protect people from this sort of violence. It would be nice if the world wasn't so full of hate that this violence even happened in the first place. None of us have any rights until everyone has rights.
Absolutely.
Until all people have civil rights, until all people can go to the hospital and be treated effectively, not turned away because of their gender identity, the color of their skin, their religion. None of us have any rights to roam around mindlessly and shop and think, well, I'm free. What difference does it make if that person over there doesn't have any rights? It makes a whole hell of a lot of difference, because it could be any of us. Right now, it's a group of people that you identify with, and a group of people I identify with. We're having similar struggles to get protections, rights, the right to speak, the right to be involved in the decision-making process of how laws actually happen. I've heard about your experience with trying to get these bills passed. It would seem that the lawmakers are listening to you. Often the lawmakers who make laws for sex workers don't even listen to the sex workers. Not at all. They want no part in actually communicating with them. they make arbitrary choices based on the false idea that women in sex work or anyone in sex work could possibly make a choice for themselves. Waiting for the truck, There was a truck. Bye, truck.
And outrage.
Back to outrage. Discrimination sucks.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, it does.
But you're absolutely right. The lawmakers are not listening to sex workers. The hard truth is that the only reason lawmakers are listening to transgender people right now is we are becoming a viable voting bloc. We have enough power to influence whether they can stay in office or not. And people get this idea of politics from what they see on the news with the president and the Congress in DC that politics is this big, unknowable, uninfluenceable thing.
Sure. Make words up.
Words
are your bitch.
Uninfluenceable thing.
Language is your bitch. Make it up.
When in fact, the real work of politics goes on at this local level that is influenceable. You have these people who are making the laws at the state level, these people who are representing you, who can be affected if you can get enough of a coalition to affect them. If you can influence, if you can go. The major way we got the transgender civil rights law passed was by going to the lawmakers and telling them our personal stories.
Yes.
Making sure they had to hear our personal stories. And they're accessible. They can't turn you away.
It's complicated.
Yes.
It's complicated. I'm under the impression that there's not a lot of laws actively targeting trans people, saying you're not allowed to transition in this country. You have to stick with the binary because that's all there is, and yada yada yada. That's not really happening. Unfortunately, sex workers are in somewhat of a slightly different position, where we're mostly dealing with a witch hunt.
Yeah.
There's all these really bizarre laws that have sprung up in the guise of saving the children. The sex trafficking laws are getting a little bit out of control.
Yeah.
The Mann Act of 1910, also known as the White Slave Traffic Act. White Slave Traffic Act.
Which has not been used really to fight
No,
white
it hasn't
slavery.
actually been used to fight white slavery. It hasn't even been used to protect the women and the children.
No.
This was a law that was originally written specifically with women and girls in mind. It said women and girls. If you were to travel with women or girls for the purpose of debauchery, you were, committing this crime, and they would, basically take you out back and shoot you. 1910, that's what they did, right?
Yeah,
right.
pretty much.
Pretty much. Yeah, that's the gist of it.
That's not far off. Yeah.
Reagan got involved. Things got messy. Now no one had been persecuted under the Mann Act for years and years and years, and all of a sudden, it's kind of back with a vengeance. Mm-hmm. People are the way the law reads right now, anyone who travels across a state line with anyone else, for a good time or not, could potentially be charged with this crime against society. It's a very vague and very strange law, though it was, they did at some point change the gendered nature of the law to, include men and boys. So now everybody's game. We can all be arrested equally.
So it's the kind of law that's used not for protection, but as a weapon.
For persecution, absolutely. It's absolutely.
It's weaponized law.
As most laws targeting sex workers in the United States are right now.
Yeah.
there's not a tremendous amount of legal protection. There's people are killed in this line of work, and people who do the killing get to walk away. Get to walk away because, you know, that's what happens when you kill a sex worker in this country. I mean, what is that actually saying about how society sees us? They won't listen when we have anything to say at all about our own experience, about the fact that maybe we're not really being trafficked. Maybe, yes, of course people are being trafficked, but not to this grandiose level that it's just this media fear-mongering that's keeping everyone so on edge. Like, no one wants the women and the children to be harmed, and it scares people, and people are very susceptible to fear in this country. And these laws are very much designed to persecute people, and once you have a couple of arrests, you're no longer part of a voting pool. So while it's possible that you might be able to exist and walk through your world and not get arrested for being trans in this country right now, which is just kind of a new situation. Not that long ago.
In the last 20 years.
Not that long ago at all. You had to have several pieces of clothing on that belonged to the, you know, sex and gender categorization that they believed you had between your legs. Oh my gosh.
Better have pants on somewhere.
Better have pants on.
Yep.
But the language is being modified, and it can help all of us when we take a look at what is going on. Like, it's not just the Baltimore public school children who are saying, you know, treating each other as yo, and you know, it's lots of schools actually. Universities actually seem to be right at the forefront of this movement. There's so many I can't actually label them all off, but the University of Washington, their newspaper, uses gender-neutral pronouns. Sarah Lawrence College has a statement on their website saying, use gender-neutral pronouns. Don't gender things if they don't need to be gendered. Warren Wilson, Pomona College just voted to eliminate gendered language on their campus. And the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, like, they publicly announced that they were going to remove the word freshman. And people got so upset. Freshman, everyone knows that a freshman it has nothing to do with men. Actually, it does have to do with men. Let's think back to a time where women were not allowed to go to universities. Yes, freshman is a term that is derived from a male-bodied student of a first-year nature. It's not that big of a deal to call students first-year students, second-year students, third-year students, and you know, it's not a problem. And it's easy enough to do. And people get so angry over this statement, and they want to defend it because they want to defend the gender binary. Because all that is holy and sacred lies in a binary gender, apparently. But changing language isn't really going to change sexist ideology. You know, there's these people who get upset about the word cisgender, about the word freshman being removed. No, the children, how will they know if they are not freshmen? It's not actually going to change the way people see sex and gender, and it's not going to make things better. It's not a magic pill to ameliorate all problems between people. There's many wars. There's many fights. People are never going to settle the fuck down. And why can't we all get along? Well, we never have. We're never going to figure out how to get along.
And there's always fighting. There's always so much fighting, even within communities, even within, like, the trans community. We knock each other down and divide each other up and arbitrarily place lines.
You were saying earlier, before the camera was rolling.
There's a world before the camera's rolling?
With us, yes. You were saying earlier that the trans community, there's a lot of judgment within the community towards sex workers, towards transgender sex workers.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, there's the community very much divides itself among these lines, a lot having to do with passing. Unfortunately, the trans community is so judgmental and not absolutely across the board, but often exclusionary of trans people doing sex work, which is, in my opinion, absolutely absurd, because as a community, as a segment of the population, we have one of the higher percentages of people who end up either choosing to or having to go into sex work, because so much of the deck is stacked against us. If you can't get a job and you can't get a place to live anywhere else and you have none of these other options, sex work is an option. And yet there's this distancing that parts of the trans community want to do.
Well, there's still this huge stigma attached to sex work.
Mm-hmm.
And if there are people in the trans community who feel like it is important for them to ostracize other people for trying to pay their bills and put food on the table, that's a problem that needs to be worked out within the community.
Yes.
I wish I had more to add to that. I mean, it's just such a tragic thing when people who are in the same boat decide to turn against each other.
Sure.
When really, if we could all figure out a way to look past our differences, we could probably fight a greater enemy. We could probably all come together. I mean, think about what would happen if minority groups actually could look past their differences with one another and take down the system.
We would be so
fight
powerful.
The white man, like, let's do this. We would be so powerful, but it's such a trap. We're all set up, we're all spinning in our own little circles, nobody ever has enough, and we're always trying to feel better than everyone else, and it really pisses me the fuck off.
Absolutely. The nasty thing about these divisions is, they set us against each other, and they make us do all the work of keeping our own communities repressed by fighting among ourselves. The man, whoever, the people, the powers that be don't even have to work all that hard to keep us from having the rights we deserve.
It's not even that they have to work very hard. It's a whole system. It's all set up. I mean, the social controls are so deeply ingrained into all of us that when some little ripple happens, like gender-neutral language and the idea that people can no longer adhere to a rigid gender binary and rigid controls that's like, they really kept gender in place. They kept people acting in only one of two ways for a very long time. When things like that happen, the system will adjust. It will adjust to whatever is going on and find a way to prevent people from achieving things. It's not, it's like one step forward and 3 steps back.
Yeah.
And I hate to be so pessimistic about it because I really want to believe that, like, yay, hooray, we can do these things now. But I can't even go outside. Like, I'm stuck here in my wonderful library because I'm too ill and the doctors can't figure out what's wrong with me, so I can't go to this conference where I'm supposed to be, talking and having questions and answers and meeting people who all of these new words could ultimately help or harm. I'm not really sure, but I was really looking forward to going, and my health is in such a state of peril that I can't. It's, the whole thing is just such a joke. It's such a joke. I'm not, people think I'm bitter. Yeah, I'm really bitter. I'm bitter about the fact that sometimes I can get up and go outside, but only for a little while, and sometimes I make plans to go and talk to people about my research, and I can't make it. And thankfully the internet will come to the rescue, and I'll try not to be, this is where I get really Debbie Downer and, like, I'm not gonna go on that tirade. There are a few things on my list that I do want to address before we wrap this up. So language is being modified at the state level. There's a couple of interesting things going on with this. Right now, the state of Washington is actively changing all of its laws to be gender non-specific, to be gender neutral, to stop being sex and gender based. It's removing all the sexism from the language. It's going to take 6 years to do this. They're combing it out. Kind of great, right? Like, and you might wonder, like, you know, what kind of laws are sex specific? There's probably lots of laws that are sex specific.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in New England, there were many,
oh my God, all the blue laws.
All the blue laws. I always joke and say, women aren't allowed to be out on the street after dark in this town.
Yeah.
And somewhere in New England, that law's probably really on the books.
I was actually looking over a summary of the... So I was at these legislative hearings the other day. We're trying to pass this public accommodations bill, and there were 209 bills being considered that day for
209?
the public. 209. A lot of them...
short on officials? Like what?
No.
Nah, they couldn't spread this out a little better.
No,
209 of them.
No, it's kind of tricky. But I know that apparently one of the bills being considered is one to strike a law from the books in Massachusetts that lumps together homosexuality and bestiality.
Well, I always thought bestiality needed to not actually be in any of its own special laws. Like, homosexuality and bestiality are still not together in Massachusetts. Wait a minute. I'm like, no, you're making a joke. I'm like, no, you're not.
No, I'm not.
You're being completely
entirely
serious.
Yeah.
You're being completely serious. So,
do
you know what the law says offhand? It's not. No. Anyone who's watching this is now going to go and look it up. So
it's essentially a quote. The law is essentially a quotation from the Bible.
Ah, lovely.
Which
Biblical laws.
lumps together homosexuality and bestiality itself. And a lot of those old blue laws, of course, are biblical laws. Are these weird laws that come from these weird law sections of the Old Testament.
Yes. There were laws in New England that said that women were not allowed to speak. That if you said anything, if you got out of line, your tongue would be put through a vice grip, that you would be beaten severely, that you would be taken out and humiliated in front of the town. All of these blue laws that have a history here and have, the further away you get, the less stringent they are. But not necessarily. I mean, like, some of them travel well.
Here's the tricky thing about those blue laws is generally they're not enforced. Generally. But they're still on the books.
They could be.
And they could be. For instance, when I was growing up, when I was a punk kid in Hyannis, Mass., there was an old blue law that made it illegal to saunter on the main street of the town.
Yes.
Like,
sauntering.
Strolling was actually illegal. And they used that old blue law to keep the kids and punks off the street.
Shake down the punks.
To keep them away from the tourists.
You kids, get out of here before I cite you for sauntering!
Yeah, seriously, though.
And they do that. And of course they do that, because that's something they can do.
Yeah. And those laws, those old blue laws that are generally not prosecuted, are especially dangerous to marginalized groups who might not be popular, like sex workers. Like, if there isn't a law making what you're doing illegal, they'll find one.
Well, in Rhode Island, there was no law against prostitution until some do-gooder noticed, and then they had to make one.
Yep.
The people of Rhode Island were perfectly content to not have a law against prostitution on the books, but unfortunately, they were forced to do just that.
Yeah.
And, a lot of laws are changing and have been changed. I mean, in 1975, the U.S. Department of Labor, which was at that point known as the Department of Manpower. Manpower. Welcome to the Department of Manpower.
The manliest department of the United States government.
Damn straight. Tom Finland. They went through and they completely modified the language to try and remove all of the sexist terminology from the language. I think it was something like 3,500 jobs got renamed, right? Things like security man became security guard, and salesman became salesperson, and they suggested switching waitress and waiter to server, and
which has never really caught on.
No, it never really has.
I like Waitron.
I think they did suggest Waitron.
Really?
But that didn't go over well.
This feels like a Japanese robot.
Waitron.
I am Waitron. I am here to take your order.
What are your pronouns, Waitron?
My pronouns are and tea.
Great, I'd like some coffee. Yes, Waitrons. Oh, one of the things that the Department of Manpower did, which, they went through all, manhole, right? Big hole in the ground where right? They changed manhole to something absolutely atrocious. And, people know it as, the entrance to the sewer and lots of other things, but they gave it some cockamamie name. They called the person who rides trails on the back of a horse in order to round up cows. Can you tell I'm not from the country? The
cowboy?
No, it wasn't cowboy, but it was trailsman. That's what they called it. It was called trailsman. They changed it to cow poker or something really sounded. It was just like. Great then.
Wow. Yeah.
Great then. And then that's not an exact quote. It's not exactly what they called it, but I'm just utilizing it as an example. It was something completely bizarre like that.
This brings up an interesting point. When legislators who, if you've ever tried to read any legislation, it is not the most exciting reading.
I fucking love it. What are you talking about?
Well, I love it too, but I'm a legislative nerd. It's not especially compelling. Try to change. These are not people who do language they're not poets. They're not.
Well, that's the thing. They actually are. Some of the very first adopters of gender-neutral language were lawyers. People who were writing laws found it really cumbersome to not have a gender-neutral pronoun. Sure. So lawyers have been at the forefront of this. Lawyers and people who are involved in the LGBTQIKAP&GQ communities and movements are currently working to modify language to be more inclusive, to reflect their own experiences as humans.
Actually got a question for my column once from a lawyer who was dealing with a trans man and wondering how the heck to refer to him.
One of the things that lawyers have been known to do is to make up their own pronouns. Lawyers are actually really pretty cutting edge and ballsy about it. They'll just straight out they'll make a little footnote. They'll say, I'm using this word as a pronoun. Gender is unimportant.
Huh.
So sometimes they use thon. Thon was one of the very first pronouns. Well, not very first pronouns, very first invented pronoun that was gender neutral. That
me thon.
Shh! I can't believe you did that. Oh my God, the guy downstairs. Wow. All right then. All right. I'm gonna have a sip of my water, and I'll be back to the Department of Manpower. The Department of Manpower. One of the things they changed that you always wonder where how the different genders of comedian and comedian happened. What is that? Does there really need to be comedian? Yeah, that was the Department of Labor. No longer scratch manpower. That was the Department of Labor. They thought that comedian sounded like maybe it was gendered, like comedian. Is that too much like man? I don't know. Let's call it comedian. I'm not exactly sure what the rationale was, but that particular gender separation happened through that 1975 whitewashing of sexism out of the language. One of the other things that's happening at the state, I guess at this point something it's bigger than the state. It's a nation. It's a national issue in Sweden. The pronoun hen. They're doing away with gender-specific pronouns, or at least in theory. I can't wait to go to Sweden to find out exactly how this is really playing out, because in the States we only get really half-assed, modified bits of news. It seems like, from my perspective, hen has been introduced to the school systems. Teachers are being asked to refrain from utilizing the terms boys and girls. Like, maybe when you were a young person, you would go to school and your teacher would get up and say, "Oh, good morning, boys and girls." Mm-hmm. Something like that. The way I understand it is that they're saying good morning, friends. I mean, I don't know, I grew up in an environment where gender was sort of downplayed, and I would never want to encourage students to think that their teacher was their friend.
No.
I'm an evil teacher. I don't want them thinking all that friendliness. But good morning, students would be gender neutral. There's many ways to say it.
Good morning, job seekers.
Fireman. Fireman.
Mickey, love, continue with the lecture. We're almost time to wrap up.
Fireman.
Yes, Mickey, love.
No, it's not fireman.
No, it's not.
It's firefighter.
Yeah.
Get it straight.
And that's a good example of an improvement. Like, firefighter is so much more dynamic than fireman.
It is. Fireman makes it sound like there's a male-based creature who is in flames.
Yeah.
But firefighter sounds like that's the person you want if you need help.
Yeah, heck yeah.
Absolutely. So, let's see. To wrap it all up in a nice, neat little package, gender-neutral language has the potential to infiltrate legal systems, school systems, corporate systems. As people generate more civil rights, as they go out into the work world, as young queer people grow up and find themselves in the cogs of capitalism, there's going to be an overhaul of language and how people are being asked to refer to each other. Singular they, I think it's going to make a comeback. I think people are going to start using singular they, if only because it is easy to say. People already know what it means. Okay, so maybe they're a little confused. Maybe they expect 2 or 3 or a whole group of people, and then just one person shows up, but they made enough food for 10. That's okay. We'll get around it. We'll figure it out. These words really do have the potential to perpetuate equality, to perpetuate a way of seeing the world that is not so based in binary gender identities and all of the trappings that have gone along with being male and female for so very long. However, if we just try and let it ride, if we say, oh good, this is happening, and we sit on our asses and we don't do anything to actually fight for gender equality, for civil rights for all people, everyone, all marginalized groups. If we think, well, I'm okay, I'm nice middle income, I got myself a library, what do I need to do? The possibility for a major cisgender, heterosexual, white, right-wing, God-fearing backlash very much exists. We were just looking at some, is hate group the appropriate term? Hate group. Yeah, some groups on the internet that want to put a stop to anything that isn't heterosexist by nature. Lorelei's pictures all over these.
They love me.
They love to hate you.
Yep.
They love to hate you. And if all of the people who are out there who can potentially do something decide to stay home, smoke a joint, and watch Adult Swim again and again and again, we're going to wake up in 20 years and realize that there was a time we could have maybe made some progress. But that time is now. And if we don't do something to further equality of human beings, we're gonna miss out, and it's gonna be really a scary place to live if you are in any way different.
It takes people turning out, raising their voice, and doing action, actually participating in trying to make the world better, trying to make the country better, the laws better, trying to make things better, I find, at the level they can affect.
At the level they can affect, yes. I mean, activism for the sake of activism is only one part of it. I mean, there's, you go out and you fight in the streets. You're at the State House, you're talking to people, you're shaking hands and kissing babies. I can't go out in the sunshine. And so I'm sitting here, armchair sociologist, you're radical trans activist, and it takes different perspectives and different work to make this all come together. No one person can actually do it. If we all just go out and stand in the street and say, what do we want? Equality. When do we want it? Now. If we do that, well, they'll just come along and tear gas us all.
Sure.
But if people who are in positions to alter laws, if people who are in positions to write books, to blog, to communicate with other people, you end up at a family reunion and there's, all those conservative family members who don't want to see you and you don't want to see them. You should relish in the opportunity to go over and indoctrinate them. Take that as a chance to maybe help change their minds. Like, help them see you as a real person, not as some scary queer who might destroy the family, the children, the women, and the children. You need to work on all fronts.
Yeah.
It's not merely activism. It's not merely going to the ballot and casting your vote. It's a combination of all things.
Sure.
And I think that a large part of it actually does have to do with interacting with other people who might not have the same perspective as you, might not have the same exact goals, but if their goal is equality, if their goal is, humane treatment for human beings, we should all be able to look past our differences, because that's the only way we're actually going to get anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you hit it exactly right. Really, I find that one of the most important ways that anyone can do activism, can create change, is in those individual personal interactions they have in their life. I mean, do what you do. I'm big and loud and public. Reading is good. And you're really good at research and words and writing. And we do what we do. But you don't have to do what we do. Do what you're best at, and read.
You can pimp that book. Why
and
not?
Read.
Read. And read.
And
even, if you feel like you can't do anything. If you're ill, if you're incapacitated, if you don't have any money, if you live out in the middle of nowhere and you simply can't get to these events, you can still read. If you have access to the internet, you can still write. If you feel like you can't do anything at all, plant a flower or help a child or something. There's always something you can do to try and make the world a better place.
Affect the people you interact with.
And ask them to use singular they as your pronoun. And it'll piss off English teachers.
I think we're about to the end of our time.
I'm sure they're all reading what's on the bookshelf. They now know grammar and gender is there, but they are probably, if you're still here, thanks. It's been lovely chatting with you.
Bye.